Welcome back to the deep dive. We're here to continue the conversation with you, really to look for clarity in a world that just feels so full of noise.
It really does.
And today we're stepping into some territory that's pretty uncomfortable, but it's something I think is universally experienced, and it's absolutely essential for anyone who wants to lead.
Whether that's leading an organization or a family, or really just leading your own life with some genuine agency.
Exactly. We are talking about the subtle, quiet current of manipulation.
And our sources for this deep dive, they come from the contemplative writings of Lóng Tíng.
Who is not, some abstract academic. He's a coach, a CEO, someone who really grounds this ancient East Asian thought into the challenges we all face in the modern global workplace.
His work is almost like a blueprint. It's about building bridges, between tradition and modernity, finding that, as he calls it, that bamboo path toward quiet clarity, even in all the chaos.
And his core observation, I think it just immediately forces you to adjust how you see this whole topic.
It really does. Because when you hear the word manipulation,
Right.
you picture a villain, right? Something loud, cinematic.
A threat.
A threat.
Yeah.
But Lóng Tíng, he gives us this really unsettling truth. He says manipulation rarely arrives like a threat. It arrives like a shift.
A shift, that one word, that distinction, it changes everything, doesn't it? It moves the whole conversation away from like high drama and into our quiet daily reality.
And that's our mission for this deep dive. We're trying to move past that theatrical idea that manipulation is always, intentional, malicious cruelty.
Right.
And instead, we need to understand its complexity. The source material really makes us see how often it functions as a survival strategy, something deeply ingrained.
And the fact that you find it everywhere, in every system, every corner of the world, it just demands that we get clear on it.
Yeah.
Especially if you're a leader.
Absolutely. It's about recognizing that quiet, almost invisible current of control that can shape your decisions, diminish your sense of self, really without you even consciously consenting to it.
So here's the roadmap for our exploration today. First, we're going to look at how this subtle control actually shows up, and we'll pay really close attention to those cultural masks that make it so hard to spot.
Then second, we'll get into the psychological roots. Why does it even exist as a learned behavior? And what's that destructive path that leads to self-doubt?
And finally, and this is the most important part, we're going to spend a good amount of time on the three-step process laid out in the writings to defeat it. This is the path to getting your agency back. Awareness, boundaries, and reconnection.
It's about moving from feeling, constantly drained to feeling steady, feeling grounded again.
Okay, let's start right there. Part 1, the subtle face of control. That first hesitation you feel.
Yes, the mechanics of subtlety. The writings point out that if manipulation were, an overt attack, a shout, a direct lie, our logical brain would just label it
And your defenses would go right up.
instantly. But the kind that really corrodes relationships and teams, it's rarely that obvious. It's that small, carefully worded sentence that just makes you hesitate for a second.
Or that smile that seems warm on the surface, but something deep down in your gut just feels unsettled.
Exactly. It's that quiet, almost polite contradiction between what's being said and what you're actually feeling.
And what I find so powerful in Lóng Tíng's work is this focus on the body as the primary indicator. I mean, we feel the change in our physical state long before our mind catches up and starts asking, wait, did that just happen?
That's it. That tightness in your chest or that sudden urge to just lean back a little.
Yeah, that sense that the ground has just been yanked out from under you for a split second. That physical warning system, it's immediate. But it's so quiet and, as the material says, almost polite that it makes it really hard to trust your own instinct.
And that leads us straight to this profound vulnerability that conscientious people have. The writings really highlight this. The people who try the hardest to be caring, the ones who listen deeply, who hold space for others, who are always looking for that win-win solution, they're usually the ones who miss the early signs.
But hold on, if these are often the most intelligent and emotionally aware people, why are they the ones missing the signal? Is it just like a lack of vigilance, or is there something deeper going on that's overriding that intelligence?
It's much deeper. And this is where we have to be really honest about the cost of grace. These individuals, they operate from what you could call a generosity framework.
A generosity framework, what does that mean in practice?
It means their default internal monologue is always giving the benefit of the doubt. It's, maybe I misunderstood the tone. Maybe their intention was good, even if the delivery was a bit off.
Or maybe I'm the one being too sensitive here.
Precisely. Maybe I should just look at this through a more charitable lens. And that self-questioning, while it's, ethically noble, it's the very thing that allows subtle manipulation to take root.
So the manipulator is actually counting on that gap. The gap between your physical instinct, the tight chest, and your intellectual desire to be fair.
Exactly. If the demand is cloaked in a reasonable request, or if the shift is polite, that conscientious person will override their own internal warning system, all to preserve harmony or just to avoid the discomfort of a confrontation.
So they're delaying the process of naming the behavior because they have this deep inherent desire to be a good person.
Yes, and in that delay, the control gets a foothold. Our capacity for empathy, for grace, it becomes the very window that lets the subtle control in. If the control were aggressive, the alarm would be deafening. But when it's wrapped up as, a desperate plea or a fake compliment, the guard just drops.
And the brain immediately silences the alarm by saying, be nice.
Be nice. That's the mechanism.
Okay, so if we understand how it slips in, we have to talk about where. Because if we just limit this to one type of personality, we miss the bigger picture.
And it is a global picture. Lóng Tíng makes this powerful pivot to its universality. It is absolutely everywhere, not because the world is broken, but because every culture has its own specific ways of hiding discomfort.
That is such a critical distinction. We're not talking about bad character here. We're talking about cultural methodology.
And the source gives us this really useful map of how manipulation wears different cultural masks. And we should be clear, when we talk about these large cultural groups, we're talking about the mechanism of control that gets embedded in a culture's highest values.
Right, recognizing that within those regions, there's infinite variety, of course, but no continent, no system is immune, and no leader should pretend their environment is some kind of vacuum.
Right.
So let's break these down because they all lead to the same place.
They do, the loss of agency. Let's start in a place where objective rationality is often held up as the highest social currency.
Okay.
In Europe, the text suggests manipulation often comes dressed up as logic.
I can see that. In business, in politics, in academia, objective data is king. Subjectivity, feelings, that's often seen as a weakness.
And the manipulation here is using that rigorous rationale or jargon or complex data to completely obscure an emotional truth or a self-serving agenda.
Can you give an example of that?
Sure. A classic one is presenting a highly persuasive, technically perfect, data-driven argument that just happens to leave out the crucial context, specifically the human cost of the decision.
Or the long-term damage to relationships.
Exactly. The person is using impeccable structure, logic, reason, evidence to shut down any subjective dissent. They're manipulating the conversation itself, forcing it into this narrow intellectual lane where you're disarmed. You can't logically refute the argument even though your gut is screaming that the outcome is wrong.
And the shift you feel is being dismissed. Your nuanced, unquantifiable understanding doesn't fit the approved logic, so you're forced to abandon your own instinct.
And if you try to bring it up, if you say, but this is going to destroy morale, you're immediately labeled as emotional or irrational. The logic itself becomes an impenetrable shield.
Okay, so from there, let's move east. In Asia, the dynamic is completely different. Here, manipulation hides behind the idea of harmony.
Yes. Cohesion, avoiding direct conflict, saving face. These are foundational values.
In the family, in the boardroom, everywhere.
So the manipulation, in this context, involves using the collective pressure of the group to enforce silence over what might be a necessary but difficult honesty.
So if you have a dissenting opinion, especially if it critiques a superior,
you're made to feel that voicing it threatens the whole group's stability, that it causes unnecessary disruption. The subtle message isn't a threat of harm. It's a threat of social exile. Your individual truth is less important than our shared appearance of unity.
So the pressure is immense. The shift is that feeling of needing to self-censor. It's often framed as respect for the elder or the team, but what it's really doing is enforcing compliance and distorting the flow of real information.
The dissonance there isn't between logic and feeling, like in the last example. It's between your individual integrity and that deep, intense need for group belonging. And the fear of shame, that is a far more powerful manipulative lever than raw aggression could ever be.
Wow. Okay, let's cross the Pacific to North America. Here, the mask is independence.
This one really speaks to that fiercely individualistic, pull yourself up by your bootstraps narrative you see so often.
In corporate culture, especially.
Absolutely. It manifests as implying that self-sufficiency is the ultimate goal, which is then used to reject necessary interdependence or accountability. A manipulative statement gets cloaked in this highly motivational language, like a true self-starter shouldn't need constant help.
And what that's really doing is insidious. It isolates you. It offloads all the responsibility onto your shoulders, even when the task is clearly systemic.
Right. By making extreme independence a virtue, the manipulator, often a manager, avoids providing the necessary resources or collaboration that a healthy system requires. If you ask for help, you're signaling weakness. If you question them, you're infringing on their autonomy.
It weaponizes the pressure to be a superhero. The shift is feeling ashamed to admit you need support, even when it's completely obvious that you do.
Okay, next, the source moves us to the Middle East, where manipulation often leads on hierarchy and respect.
Right. In systems where those established social and organizational structures are sacred, your status is everything.
And here, that status becomes the ultimate shield against any kind of feedback. The manipulation is using one's position, age, title, authority to just suppress questioning.
So the shift is instantaneous. The moment you question a decision, it's not seen as healthy skepticism.
It's reframed as disrespecting the person who holds the status. The conversation is shut down not by logic, but by just invoking the structure of the relationship. The message is, I am your superior. You don't have the standing to question me.
Which creates a climate where essential feedback, risk assessment, all of it just never gets delivered because the perceived social cost is just too high. The power differential itself is the tool.
And finally, the text touches on Africa and Latin America, where manipulation often wraps itself in the profound value of family and loyalty.
This makes sense. In cultures where those close bonds are foundational, the lines between professional and personal can get very blurry.
And when manipulation happens here, it leverages the emotional weight of those bonds to enforce silence or obligation. It can become a kind of emotional blackmail.
The classic, we're family, so you have to do this for me.
Exactly. Or the really devastating one, if you truly cared about us, you wouldn't expose this problem.
Yeah.
The high value of loyalty is distorted into an obligation to overlook bad behavior or even wrongdoing.
So the shift is feeling trapped by your own affection. The love that should be protective becomes the very chain that demands your silence.
And what a synthesis this is. You see these different values, logic, harmony, independence, hierarchy, family, and you realize they're just different wrappers.
Different wrappers for the exact same function, using a culture's highest value to obscure an agenda and enforce control. It confirms that the same bruise of having your agency taken away, it exists everywhere.
And that's the key takeaway for anyone listening. You can't pretend these dynamics don't exist in your world just because you haven't seen an overt threat. You have to learn to spot the local mask, to recognize the universal mechanism underneath.
Which brings us to the next critical question, the why. Why do people do this? The source material moves us away from pure judgment and toward a really important psychological nuance.
It's an essential insight. To really understand this, we have to address the fact that manipulation isn't always born from malice or, psychopathy. I mean, there exists, of course.
Of course.
But often, and this is the disturbing part, it's a deeply ingrained, almost reflexive survival strategy.
Okay, but this is where I feel like we need to add some friction. Because if we focus too much on the manipulator's trauma or their past, aren't we just making excuses for toxic behavior? How does the material balance understanding the root with holding people accountable?
That is the pivotal question. And Lóng-Tíng's analysis insists you have to hold both at the same time. Understanding the root explains the behavior. Holding accountability addresses the impact.
So the origin story doesn't erase the damage caused.
Not at all. The behavior persists because at some point it was effective. It worked, even if it's no longer necessary or appropriate now. Let's look at the logic behind it because it's really about people copying what once protected them from profound pain.
Okay.
The source gives 3 powerful examples of this shift into a habitual defense. First, they learned to bend the truth because at some point in their life, truth was punished.
So if every honest mistake was met with, like, existential judgment or getting fired,
then the safest route becomes constructing a narrative that minimizes the fault or shifts the blame or just obscures the data. The message they learned was, reality is dangerous. I have to build a safer, slightly fictional one to survive.
you see this in organizations all the time, a manager who constantly spins failures into learning opportunities because they once worked for a CEO who fired people on the spot for admitting a mistake.
Exactly. They're still protecting themselves from a ghost. Second, they learn to avoid accountability because shame was too heavy.
Meaning, if failure meant being labeled permanently bad or incompetent?
Yes. If their self-worth was just destroyed every time they made a mistake, then avoiding responsibility becomes a life-preserving act. The behavior isn't about actively hurting you, it's about preventing themselves from being crushed by this debilitating shame.
They will.
They will sacrifice your clarity to protect their own internal stability.
Wow.
And third, and this is a deeply relational one, they learn to control because vulnerability felt unsafe. If every time they were open or relied on someone or were intimate, it led to abandonment or betrayal.
They conclude that the only safe place is in total command.
Total command of their environment and, crucially, the emotions of others. They substitute control for genuine, reciprocal connection.
That makes the cycle terrifyingly clear. You're watching an adult using old emotional armor in what should be a much safer world.
It's a defense mechanism that's outlived its usefulness, but has become the default setting. And again, we have to be clear. Understanding the root doesn't erase the impact. Regardless of intent, manipulation always shrinks someone. It erodes their clarity, their agency, their sense of self. The impact on the victim is the same.
And that's where we need to go next. To the core damage, which is that slow, quiet erosion of your internal compass, the danger of normalization. We're talking about how quickly confusion just becomes your normal state.
And even more dangerously, how easily self-doubt becomes a habit.
A crippling habit.
The material paints this picture of self-erosion as a process. It's a slow bleed, not a sudden injury. And it starts with second-guessing. You start to question your most basic reactions. Did I really say that? Was I actually that upset, or am I just blowing this out of proportion?
Well, maybe they're right. Maybe I am too sensitive.
Right. You become your own internal inquisitor. And because the manipulator is so confident, so smooth, you inevitably end up citing against your own shaky internal evidence. You just lose confidence in your own reality filter.
Which then forces you into the next stage, which is constant adjustment.
Constant adjustment. You start walking on conversational eggshells, preemptively editing your thoughts and your language to avoid triggering them. And this consumes a massive, exhausting amount of energy.
Energy that should be going into your work or creativity or real connection.
And all of this leads to the ultimate loss of footing. You give the benefit of the doubt so many times that your own boundaries become completely blurry. The line separating your reality from their reality it disappears.
And when you can't tell where you end and they begin, that's when the manipulation has really succeeded. You're carrying their expectations and their confusion around inside you like it's your own problem to solve.
And connecting this to the systemic level is so important for leaders listening. Leadership is supposed to create clarity and orientation, not distortion. But in so many organizations, that feeling of chronic confusion is felt by the staff long before anyone dares to name the dynamic that's draining them.
That distortion creates a dangerous, low-trust culture. When people are constantly walking on eggshells around a senior leader, they aren't innovating. They're not being honest about risks.
They're not. They're focused on emotional self-preservation. And so the organization starts operating on fundamentally distorted information. It mistakes compliance for consensus and avoids critical truths just to keep a false peace.
Which brings us to the ecosystem that allows this to thrive. The source is so clear on this, across all cultures. Manipulation thrives in silence.
It does. And that silence is maintained by specific, identifiable conditions. If we want to dismantle these dynamics, we have to recognize the structures that enforce it.
In teams, in organizations, not just in personal relationships.
First, it flourishes in spaces where people question themselves instead of questioning the behavior. The environment basically forces you to internalize everything. When your first reaction to an unsettling comment is, "What did I do wrong?" instead of "What was wrong with that comment?" the manipulator has already won.
They turn your gaze inward when the problem is external. It's just this constant self-interrogation.
Second, it thrives in teams where harmony is valued more than honesty. And while that echoes the Asian cultural mask we talked about, it is rampant everywhere.
In customer service, internal politics, you name it.
When keeping up a pleasant veneer is prioritized over delivering difficult but necessary truth, manipulation gets a green light. Conflict avoidance gets mislabeled as peace, when it's actually just the slow corrosion of trust.
What's the third environment?
Third, in families or any close-knit group where loyalty means staying quiet. This could be a corporate founding team, an inner circle of allies, any high cohesion unit. Loyalty gets twisted into a tool to demand complicity.
So the ultimate test of your loyalty becomes, will you sacrifice your integrity for the good of the group?
And if you pass that test by staying quiet, you've just reinforced the entire manipulative system. And fourth, And this one is so relevant in high-performance organizations. It's where performance is used as a shield for poor behavior.
The brilliant jerk.
The brilliant jerk, exactly. If an executive brings in huge revenue, their bad conduct, the subtle controls, the dishonesty, the chaos they create, it's all overlooked. It's excused because the bottom line is protected.
So the results become their immunity badge, and the team learns a really cynical lesson. Our integrity is secondary to our output.
Precisely. And the common thread through all of these environments is that internal alarm bell we started with. You can feel the confusion long before you can logically explain it. And that feeling, that's what sets up the shift toward the solution. It has to begin with honoring that feeling, not silencing it.
Okay, so we have mapped the landscape. We've seen its quiet entry points, its cultural disguises, and how it uses doubt and silence to sustain itself. Now we have to turn to the most critical part, the actionable path out of it.
The three-step sequence for reclaiming your agency. For a leader, this isn't optional. It's an imperative.
It all starts with a step that sounds simple, but it is so hard. Awareness. It requires the courage to just stop accepting confusion as your normal state.
And awareness here isn't passive recognition. It's an active, forceful clarity. It's the moment the fog lifts and you finally recognize that something has been shaping you without your consent.
It's not about isolated incidents anymore. It's about seeing the pattern.
That's the whole thing. You stop collecting weird, isolated events, and you start seeing the predictable dynamic. You move from, am I crazy, to, wait, this is a repeatable pattern of behavior designed to make me doubt myself.
That is the essence of it. And that clarity, it demands you look directly at the uncomfortable dynamics, even if the control is coming from someone you love or respect or depend on professionally.
You have to be willing to name it, at least to yourself. If you can't call it what it is internally, you have no chance of dismantling it externally.
So what's a practical step someone can take to get from just feeling the discomfort to actually naming that pattern?
The material suggests something simple but profound. Externalization. When you feel that shift, the tight chest, the hesitation, write down exactly what was said or done. Right away. Don't analyze it. Just record the facts and your immediate reaction.
And over time, the pattern becomes undeniable.
It does. Gaslighting relies on you trusting their memory over your own. Awareness is the deliberate choice to document your own truth. It's the prerequisite for all agency.
Okay, so once that fog lifts, the next step is boundaries. This is where the clarity becomes action.
And this is a point that creates so much internal resistance. People hear boundaries and they think confrontation, anger, rupture.
But Lóng Tíng gives us this vital, constructive definition. Boundaries are not walls erected in anger. They are self-respect made visible.
That reframe is transformative, isn't it?
It completely is. If a boundary is just my self-respect made visible, then setting one isn't an attack on them. It's me stating the terms under which I can respect myself and, by extension, respect our relationship as functional, not controlling.
That is exactly it. If awareness is the internal recognition, the boundary is the external articulation of return to your own reality. It's the active choice to prioritize your agency over their comfort.
And these boundaries can take different forms, right?
You can. We can think of them in three types.
First?
Time and energy boundaries.
Yeah.
This is saying no to the demands that steal your focus, the ones disguised as urgent crises. Second, informational boundaries. This is refusing to engage in gossip or triangulation, refusing to be pressured to reveal sensitive information that you know will be weaponized later. And third, emotional boundaries. This is the refusal to take on or process the manipulator's disproportionate feelings or their shame.
Can you give an example of stating an emotional boundary without sounding aggressive, using that self-respect made visible model?
Certainly. Let's say the manipulator is using guilt to get compliance. A boundary based on self-respect would sound like this. I understand you're disappointed with my decision, but I can't discuss this further if the conversation involves shaming me. I'm willing to have a productive discussion once we can stick to the facts.
See, you're not attacking their feeling. You're setting a boundary around the method of communication.
Yeah.
You're defining the territory of your steady self.
You're saying, I will no longer contort myself to fit your changing narrative. My time, my reality, and my emotional energy are defined by me. That's the practical step of enforcing the clarity you gained in step one.
And what should you expect after setting that boundary? Because it's probably not going to be a quiet surrender.
No. You should anticipate the boundary test. The manipulator will often escalate or maybe retreat for a bit and then try to guilt you back across the line. They're testing you to see if your self-respect is a temporary thing.
And the leader's role here is crucial. They have to protect the person who sets the boundary to show that the culture values integrity over conformity.
Yes. A boundary isn't a one-time fight. It's a consistent, visible action. That's why it takes courage.
Okay, so awareness gives us clarity, boundaries give us protection. The final step, then, is reconnection.
And this is perhaps the most restorative step.
Yeah.
This is where the shrinking self starts to expand again. You move out of isolation and back into a steady, shared reality.
Because after so long of having your reality questioned, your internal compass is just unreliable. You need external calibration points.
You do, and the material synthesizes three distinct types of reconnection that are necessary to purge the manipulator's fingerprints from your perception.
What's the first one?
First is reconnection to people who speak truth without distortion. This means actively seeking out those who reflect reality back to you accurately, who validate your perception without judgment.
The people who aren't invested in your confusion.
Exactly. They're your external calibration tools. When you tell them what happened, they don't jump to telling you to appease the other person. They just acknowledge the reality of what happened and the validity of your reaction.
That validation is everything. It shatters the isolation that manipulation depends on. It's that moment you realize, it wasn't just me, they saw it too.
Second, reconnection to the version of yourself that felt steady, grounded, intact.
An internal retrieval mission.
It is. It means actively remembering who you were before the doubt took hold. What were your core values? What did you know to be true? You can do this by revisiting old journals or talking to friends who knew you back then. It helps you recognize that the confusion is an imposition, not your authentic state.
And the third type of reconnection.
The third, and this is a big one for leaders, is reconnection to reality without someone else's fingerprints on it. This is the rigorous process of stripping away the distorted narratives, the misplaced guilt, and just seeing the data and the human consequences for what they are.
No spin, no justification, just the raw, unfiltered facts.
The facts and the consequences.
Okay.
And that sequence awareness, boundaries, reconnection, it is a complete self-rescue operation. And the outcome is the ultimate victory. The moment you are fully returned to yourself, manipulation loses its power.
Because it can only control a self that is fractured, doubting, and isolated.
Exactly. And as we finish this deep dive, let's zoom out one last time and just reiterate the broader purpose here. This analysis isn't about moral judgment. It's about understanding how universal human psychology and our global systems intertwine. It's about seeing patterns that cross borders and hierarchies.
And this is where the mandate for leadership really becomes clear. Leaders are responsible for the environment they create. If confusion is normal in your organization, if silence is rewarded, then the system is broken. It doesn't matter how high the performance numbers are.
An organization built on manipulated silence is brittle. It will break. The source material challenges every single person listening. If leadership means anything, it means having the courage to look directly at these uncomfortable dynamics.
It means being the one who's willing to name the shift, who enforces clarity, and who models the self-respect needed to hold a boundary, even when it's inconvenient.
It's choosing that difficult truth over easy comfort. It means dismantling the systems that protect the high-performing manipulator. It means validating the instinct of that quiet person on your team who feels the unsettling shift long before they can prove it with data. A true leader creates space for instinct to speak.
And the beauty of this framework is its universality.
It is. The path out is the same in every culture, every system, every relationship. The moment anyone, an individual, a leader, chooses truth over comfort, agency over doubt, and connection over control, the dynamic shifts. Permanently. That courage is the only antidote.
What a profound and, I think, really essential journey. We went from recognizing that quiet, unsettling smile, the shift, all the way through the cultural mass, whether it's the logic in Europe or the loyalty in a family structure, and into that painful reality that this is often a learned, desperate survival behavior that slowly shrinks the self.
And the real devastation is that slow erosion as doubt becomes a habit and your boundaries just blur. But we hope we leave you today with that three-step antidote, that internal compass reset. Awareness to lift the fog, boundaries to make your self-respect visible, and reconnection to bring you back to a steady, grounded reality. It's a continuous return to your authentic self.
And we want to leave you with the deepest question that the source material poses. It really forces us to look at our own complicity in the silence. We sense confusion so clearly, our body reacts instantly to the shift, yet we so often just keep moving as if clarity were optional because we're afraid of the disruption truth might bring. So the question is, why do we silence the very first honest instinct that tries to warn us? Where in your life does that quiet internal instinct need your immediate courageous attention today? Think on that until our next deep dive.